I have to laugh when Daniel was reading the words good grapes and rotten grapes. My husband's out of town, and so my youngest son called me yesterday, and we were having this long conversation. It's not uncommon for the kids, if they talk to me on Saturday, to say, well, what are you preaching on tomorrow? And I went on sort of this rampage about good grapes and rotten grapes, and he said, that doesn't sound very inspiring. So when you said it, it made me giggle. But anyway, join me in prayer. God, as we share in this message this morning, we ask that you would open our hearts, our minds, our spirits, that you would renew us, inspire us, send us back into the world, new people. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I'm beginning this new sermon series, and I'm using this image of the vineyard. If you think about in Jesus' time, wine was what was the everyday drink. It was not water. Water was not safe, and so people found themselves drinking wine. And oftentimes, the image of the vineyard, this metaphor of the vineyard and healthy vineyard and growing the vineyard and good grapes and rotten grapes, as I said, was not uncommon. It very much spoke to the day. And so over the next several weeks, we're looking at this idea of what are the fruits that we are to produce, if you will, as people of faith. And it's also the time in the life of the church known as stewardship, which is a word just reminding us, it's a biblical word, and it's a word reminding us how it is. It's an invitation each year to invite us to just think, how are we using not only our financial gifts, but all of our lives? How is it that we are giving to God? I love a good/bad joke, right? I mean, isn't stewardship the perfect time for it? Okay, let me tell you a couple. The Sunday school teacher was just finishing a lesson on honesty and said, do you know where children go if they don't put their money in the collection plate? And a little boy said, yes, ma'am, they go to the movies. It's really bad, right? Okay, here's another one, equally as bad. I do appreciate when you laugh at my bad jokes. There was a meeting, and the congregation's wealthiest member decided to share a portion of his faith story, and he said, I'm a millionaire, and I attributed all of that to the rich blessings of God in my life. I can still remember the turning point in faith, like it was yesterday. I just earned my first dollar, and I went to a youth meeting. You can try this, Emily, tonight. I went to a youth meeting that night. The speaker was a missionary who told us about his work. I knew that I only had $1 and had to give it all to God's work. So at the moment, I decided to give everything I had to God. I believe that God blessed that decision, and that is why I'm a rich man today. And when he finished and sat down, the chair of the stewardship committee leaned over and said, wonderful story. I dare you to do it again. You can use that one. But this really is an invitation. This is about all of us just looking at our lives. Obviously, we're going to be talking about giving financially to the church. That will come on November 17th. We're going to have a celebration Sunday. We are going to invite you to turn in your pledges. But over the next several weeks, we're just going to look at what are the fruits that God is inviting us to produce in our lives. And again, we're using this image of a vineyard and grapes. And what's wonderful is that Jesus pulls from the prophet Isaiah. And when he's talking to his followers and those who are listening and surrounding him, he pulls from this 5th chapter as Isaiah is sharing about this image of good fruits and bearing fruits. And today, he says, in order, Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, and Jesus takes it a little further and says, in order to bear fruit, to show God you are living a life that God is intending you to live, we are to bear fruits of justice and righteousness. Justice and righteousness. And that is what we're going to look at today. And I love the words of Isaiah because it talks about what we are made for. As human beings, we have a deep longing for purpose. We often want to know, what is my purpose in life? What is my meaning? Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, said this as he was talking about meaning making, and those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. He goes on to talk about when we lose a sense of purpose and meaning in the world. He says, we are not long of this world. And see, this passage gives the answer to the question, what is the purpose of this life? We are God's vines and are to produce fruit. We are meant to produce fruit. What fruit are we meant to produce? Isaiah has an answer to that as he says in chapter 5, justice and righteousness. So you have to go back and read, and I would invite you to do so. We're going to do that. We're not having the Bible study this Tuesday because most of you are going to be gone. So next Tuesday, we're going to go back and we're going to read the first 4 chapters of Isaiah. He talks about just how horrible we are as human beings up until chapter 5. There is this indictment on humanity throughout the first 4 chapters. And he's telling us all about the fruit that we don't produce and all the fruit of his time that wasn't being produced. And then he goes on to say, God expects justice. Then he says, but instead, so often there's bloodshed. God expects righteousness. But instead, there is cries of distress. Justice and righteousness are the fruits that we are meant to produce. So what do they mean? Well, I want to go back to the Hebrew because it's important for us to look at these words within its original context. And in the Hebrew, mishpat means justice. It's an important concept, and it's spoken hundreds of times over and over and over again in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. We see this word mishpat, that is what we were made for. And then we see the word zeduka, and that means righteousness. And again, that is seen over and over again. It's saying to us, that is what you are meant for. Then there was a third core value, hesed. The word hesed, loving kindness or covenant love. It is a love that is shown in spite of the other person or in spite of the situation. And all 3 of these values are the fruits by which we are to live our lives. When mishpat is talked about, it is talked about in terms of the marginalized, the poor, the orphans, those who have no other rights. Think about that in our own context. And what the biblical authors say is that God is concerned with and is protecting the rights of the vulnerable, that we are called to live into that as well. See, justice for those who were powerful, who had power, they didn't have to worry about justice because they knew the judges. They had resources to be able to sort of make it their way, get their way. And what the scriptures are telling us and what we are challenged now is that justice is for everyone. See, this is a value that we hold as Americans. If you remember, if you know the Pledge of Allegiance, it's captured in the phrase of, liberty and what? Justice for all. Not just for some. We don't say liberty and justice for some, do we? Justice for all. This is a biblical concept. And Isaiah is calling out the people of his time, and I would say it's a good challenge for us today. It doesn't always happen that way. And Isaiah says, your prince are rebels, companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and pursues gifts. They don't defend the orphan, and the widow's cause never reaches them. So he's saying, he's calling out that they're taking more and more, and they're building more and big. Their houses are getting bigger, if you will, and the poor are getting poorer all around. That's mishpat. That's justice. Tzedukah, righteousness, is the second of these words. This is the fruit to do the right thing. And it's more than that. It's as we were talking about, having kindness and compassion, showing acts of mercy, acts of compassion. So justice and righteousness go hand in hand. So as we think about this, and I want you to visualize with me today, I want you to visualize this. Every act that is unmerited, undeserved, every act that you participate in with a stranger, every time you build the kits for Days for Girls, every time you build the Chef Hardy kits, every time you show up at Habitat for Humanity, every time you do a crop walk, all of the things that we invite you to do every single week, those are acts of tzedukah, of righteousness. I was thinking how so many acts of tzedukah happen around here and in our community all the time. And I am the recipient of, on the thank you end, I get to read the letters from our community partners and from people who you have blessed. And I wanted you to just hear from some of those who have thanked you, the community, throughout this past year. Take a listen.
One of the biggest privileges as serving as pastor is that I get to be the one who holds stories. I get to hold the stories of our congregation, the living stories of long, rich lives, of families gathering, of laughter and love. I get to hold the stories of brokenness, of pain, of addiction, of loss, of grief. And I also get to be the holder, the keeper of the stories that come in with our partnering agencies, those in our community who we often serve. And I realized recently that I don't always share them with you. We so often get thank you letters from organizations who we have served, and they tell a story of how our gifts are impacting them. For example, the Our Center sent a letter saying, thanking us for a recent gift that we gave. And it said, because of our gift, this one particular person said, I am sending this note to thank you for the amount you paid on behalf of me and my baby. Your generosity to help us in our time of need allows us to keep our electricity on. We are forever grateful and appreciate the help to get back on track more than you know. I get letters from Recovery Cafe after our November Thanksgiving meal of a group of people saying, thank you so much for providing such a generous and beautiful meal. I hadn't dressed up in years, and I got to dress up and be with my family in the holidays. Thank you for everything you do. We appreciate your constant generosity. We often get thanked from our Wild Plum, which is our Head Start here in our own building. We get thanked for Chef Hardy when we provide meals. And it's not just food, it's spiritual food, it's emotional food. It helps nourish the family as they get together and they cook together. I often get thanked from those who we have served in memorial services. Thank you so much to the Heart of Longmont providing this beautiful building so that you can honor and celebrate the life of my mom, my dad, my grandmother, my grandfather. I give thanks for you, our congregation here at the Heart of Longmont, as I hold these living stories in front of you. I give thanks for your contributions that you give so that these stories can keep being told over and over and over again. Thank you.
Tzedukah, These are the stories, the living stories in our lives of justice and righteousness, the fruits that God says we are made for. Well, see, when it comes to vineyards, I went down a rabbit hole this week of what it takes to grow a healthy vineyard. I was even at one point thinking, I wonder if I could do it on my property. I can't, so don't worry. I'm not growing any vines. But there is this word in French. It's the word terroir, T-E-R-R-O-I-R. And it's what it takes to grow healthy vines. And it's about the conditions of the soil that determines how a grape tastes. And I love this image as we're thinking of a Christian life. So if we are God's vines, we are all growing in some form of terroir, of some soil, of some surrounding, if you think about it. And it influences if we have those rotten or good grapes. Think about our family of origin, the way in which we were raised, that has influenced our surrounding. And think about the people that you choose to surround yourself with, the different communities that you find yourself involved with. Think about what you read. Think about what you listen to. Think about what you look at on your phone, if you will, or the reels or the TikToks or whatever it might be. All of that influences our terroir. I think so much of our current climate of division and hate and othering is because of that environment that we find ourselves living in. I don't know if you follow at all El Comité, which is an organization in our local community, but this past week, the executive director wrote a letter about the impact that the national dialogue and the dehumanization around immigrants is having on our local community of Longmont. She told of our local community of immigrants living here who are scared to leave their house. Terroir. There was a movie shown this past week called Humanize at the Longmont Library, and it was reminding us to not participate in dehumanizing people. Please, come on. Thank you. And I was thinking back when I served a church, my first appointment was at a large church in Boise, Idaho, and our senior pastor was well known and infamous for preaching fairly challenging sermons each week, and it was not uncommon for us to leave our building and to see Westboro Baptist outside protesting something that we had done, or my pastor had done, or some stance that we had taken, biblical stance in our local community. And if you know anything about Westboro Baptist, I believe, their terroir, the ground in which they are raising up, the soil that they base their biblical understanding is hate. It is not love. And I want you to look at this picture, because look at the child. I guarantee that child's no older than maybe 9 or 10. That's what they're learning in children's ministry. That's what they're learning in their sermons. When he goes to church, he's hearing hate. See, we gather in God's vineyard, the church, and my hope is to create a terroir of love. I think of our children. One of my favorite things after church one Sunday was a mom was looking for her daughter and couldn't find her, and they were busy upstairs playing hide and seek and running around and having the best time. Do you think that child is going to think of the church as a place of hate? I think of our youth who come on Sunday mornings and then come back Sunday evenings and our youth gather here to study the Word and to share their joys and their concerns and to run around like crazy, which is exactly what we should want our children and youth to do. Amen? Even if you break something, Emily, don't tell anybody, okay? So, see, we are the vines, and we are made for justice and righteousness. So here's the question. What is the fruit you are bearing on a daily basis? Justice, compassion, mercy, acts of generosity? And what is the terroir you are surrounding yourself with? Amen.